Going ahead. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this webinar. I'm Zeynep Engin, Chair and Director of the Data for Policy Community of Interest and also Editor-in-Chief of Data and Policy Journal. I will be hosting this session together with my co-founder of the Data for Policy community, John Crowcroft, Professor of Communication Systems in the Computer Laboratory at University of Cambridge and also researcher at large at the Alan Turing Institute. We are organizing this session in collaboration with Cambridge University Press and UCL Institute of Innovation and Public Purpose to mark the publication of an important paper in Data and Policy outlining new theory of algorithmic attention rents, how platforms control user attention and shape markets. We are delighted to have the three authors of this paper with us in this conversation. Mariana Mazzucato, founding director and professor in the economics of innovation and public value at the UCL Institute of Innovation and Public Purpose. Tim O'Reilly, CEO and founder of O'Reilly Media and visiting professor of practice at UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. And Ilan Strauss, senior research associate at UCL's IIPP, again, Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. Before we start, just a few housekeeping notes. We expect the session to last for about an hour, and we have earmarked around 10 to 15 minutes towards the end of the session to cover audience questions. Please use the link my colleagues will share in the Zoom to pose your questions throughout the session. Anyone can also vote on these questions to prioritize, so we know which ones to ask first at the end. Please also note that the event is being recorded and it will be made available on YouTube via Data for Policy platforms. If you experience any technical problems, add them to the chat, please. Andrew Hyde and other colleagues from Cambridge University Press will help you if anyone is experiencing any difficulty. Now, actually, onto the paper we want to talk about algorithmic attention rents, a theory of digital platform market power. We have published this paper recently in the Data and Policy Journal. It might be the fastest publication to pass through our peer review process. We received great reviews on that. So thanks to all three authors for choosing to publish their work with us on our platforms. If you have not yet read the paper yourself, I would urge you to do so quickly, immediately. The link has been provided to you with the registration correspondence, and also I believe my colleagues can share it in chat. Without talking too much myself, I would like to just hand it over to Mariana, Tim, and Ilan in that order to tell us a bit more about themselves and also share their opening remarks. A few minutes each, please. Thank you. So Mariana, over to you, please.
Sure. So thank you so much for organizing this, and it's great to be here with my co-authors. Maybe just some words on how this project began. Tim and I met, I think it was on Lake Como in Bellagio. I can't remember if we had actually met before, but anyway, there we decided that we needed to team up on a project of this sort, bringing together really what IIPP, my institute at UCL, was founded to do, which is to kind of bring forth much more explicitly than is often done, the direction of growth, the direction of technological change, and how contested it is. There's nothing deterministic in how technology develops. There's nothing deterministic in how growth develops. With Tim's deep understanding of technology around, let's just call it the Silicon Valley IT revolution. Specifically today, we're talking about algorithms, but he's really the guy who I think founded even the word Web 2.0. So bringing together these two kind of expertises, mine more from political economy, Tim's more from the knowledge of the technology, but really to ask the big question, how can we make sure that the evolution of technology today, and not just artificial intelligence, but we'll be focusing on that today, is talked about, is governed, is contested in a way that actually brings forth the deep issues and doesn't assume that there's only one way of thinking of corporate governance or policymaking. And I myself have written a lot about the bottlenecks that we have around policy when we just think about it as fixing market failures, because then by definition and by design, you're always too little, too late, reactive, not proactive, and the bottlenecks and problems with the corporate governance structure, which thinks that the only thing it can do is maximize shareholder value. And even though there's concepts like stakeholder value it's really remained, I think, a pretty flimsy concept. So in some ways, we can actually see the work that we're doing today in this project, in this paper, but also related work, as really asking what would stakeholder value actually look like in terms of how we produce, not just ex post, and how we pick up the mess afterwards. And it starts really with this concept of rent. Why is rent important in this paper and in economics? Because anytime we're looking at profit making and capitalism, right? We're talking about capitalism, not feudalism. We have to actually differentiate how are profits made. There's a whole literature on kind of Schumpeterian profits versus Ricardian rents, and the idea that actually rents are not actually reflecting investment, innovation, entrepreneurship, but are really just reflecting control over some sort of scarce factor of production. Rent seeking refers to the attempt to generate income, not by producing anything new, but by either overcharging the competitive price, undercutting competition, or doing something that, for the sake of speed here, we'll just call bad. So what is bad? What is good? That actually depends ultimately on what one's theory is of value creation. And this distinction between value creation, value extraction, and also value destruction is unfortunately no longer actually at the forefront of economic thinking. Adam Smith, Karl Marx, David Ricardo, later Schumpeter, that was a huge distinction. Even the physiocrats, the first economists ever in the 1700s, they really paid attention to that. They looked at how value was produced in farming, then got very worried about getting extracted out of the economy by the landlords, who they called the sterile class, because they wanted the system to reproduce itself. So using these biological metaphors, then they used the word sterility when there was too much extraction. And really the theory of rent seeking and rents has kind of moved along from a theory of landlords and rents and farming and in real estate, which, by the way, still exists. A lot of rents are captured in the real estate sector. Something like 80% of finance in the UK actually goes to finance, insurance, and real estate. So from landlords and land, patents, intellectual property rights are another big area where people look at rents. I talked a lot about that in my book, Value of Everything. The financial sector, as I just mentioned, has been looked at in terms of rents. And really what we do in this paper, which I think is quite new, is to extend that idea of rents at the level of production, right? How we produce, how we govern production, to AI in the modern digital economy. And on that note, I actually had some notes here where I was going to introduce how we do that with algorithmic rents, but I think it's neater if I now hand over to Tim to say something about algorithmic rents. So kind of, by the way, there is a paper that I wrote with Josh Ryan Collins and Yorgos Gouzilis called Mapping Modern Economic Rents, that kind of brings you through that history of rents from the landlords, finance, intellectual property rights, and to the modern digital economy. And really what this project then did was to say, let's hone in on rents in the digital economy, also because this is one of the biggest problems that we face today. I'll just say lastly that because rents are so large in this sector, the talent that is going into the sector is being paid with very high salaries. So it's the first time that in the history of capitalism, I would argue that the technology and the knowledge is almost all inside not only the private sector, but within few companies. And that issue of skills is hugely important because it's almost impossible to govern this sector without the skills and knowledge kind of at the forefront of the area. But where is the money coming from to pay for these excessive, the excessive rents in the sector? This is really what the project also does. So I'll hand over to Tim to talk about how we actually look at algorithmic rents.
Yeah. So let me start really, I'll come back around to rents, but I want to start with the tech industry and in some ways, my love affair with Google and Amazon. When they first came out, they were doing something new and marvelous. And particularly in the case of Google, I thought it was a tremendous advance in the structure of markets. For so many years, we've sort of thought of prices almost as the mechanism of the invisible hand. They're the thing that coordinates and sums up the collective knowledge, that allows the market to work. But suddenly you had a matching marketplace, in the case of Google in particular, that was matching hundreds of millions, eventually billions of users with hundreds of millions of suppliers of content, maybe billions, trillions of there are trillions of web pages, using these algorithmic signals and this kind of what I called in 2005 when I wrote my What is Web 2.0 paper, collective intelligence. And Amazon too kind of harnessed collective intelligence to figure out, even though they were taking price into account, they were taking all kinds of other signals as well to say, this is really the best match for what you're looking for. And so there was this huge advance in markets. And so it started to concern me as I saw that change. And at first it changed because of attacks from people in the ecosystem. So for example, spammers working on Google. And there was a major update to Google, Google's algorithms in 2011 called the Panda algorithm update. I was later told by someone at Google that was partly inspired by my feedback to them that they were losing the war against spammers. And so it was kind of like they were still really trying to be virtuous and give value to their customers. But in the second decade of the of their existence, or really maybe the third, 95 was the starting point for Amazon, 98 for Google. But certainly after the 2010s, you started to see something different happen. And you saw particularly at Amazon with their ad business, where instead of trying to improve the experience of the customer and make the best match for the customer, they were starting to make the best match for themselves. And I was really concerned about this. And then when I read Mariana's book, The Value of Everything, and its account of rents, I suddenly had a language for thinking about that. And Mariana and I actually met when that book came out, and we actually did an event together at Bloomberg where I interviewed her about it. And but it really was a landmark point in my thinking. And so we were at an AI convening in Bellagio, I think it was on AI, in 2019. And we started talking about rents and algorithms. And Mariana said, well, we have this new project on it called Mapping Modern Economic Rents. Why don't we do something together? So that was really the origin of how all this came together. And I've kind of summed up this narrative in another paper, which is called Rising Tide Rents and Robber Baron Rents, which contrasts the kind of virtuous rents that come when companies are truly innovating with the extractive rents that you see later. But anyway, as we started talking about this and thinking about it, we really started thinking about a couple of things. One, there's this core notion of sort of an actual good that you can actually identify. In the case of these algorithmic matching systems, and this applies not just to Google and Amazon, but to dating sites, to whatever it might be. The good is actually the best match. And in the lore of technology, they call this the best organic results. Or they talk about earned attention, for example, in social media. You attract attention because people like your stuff. So that's earned. And in some sense, the essence of rents is that they are unearned. Maybe they're bought. And in the case of what we started to see at Amazon in particular, they were replacing the best match with paid results that were actually better for Amazon. And so we started really thinking about, how do we actually do that? What is the market power that Amazon has that allows them to make this bad match and get away with it? And so that's really what became the subject of the research. But there's another component I want to get to before I let Ilan dig down a little deeper into the mechanisms that we explored. And that is the notion of an ecosystem. Because part of the match, and this is reflected in the European Union's definition of these platforms as gatekeepers, right? They are matching users with suppliers of some kind. In the case of websites, it's suppliers of information. In the case of Amazon, it's suppliers of products. And in the case of social media, maybe other users who are suppliers, or maybe firms that are suppliers of content. And the question is there a harm to the ecosystem? And in some sense, it's that understanding the mechanism of gatekeeping through the company's algorithms that we set out to explore. And we came to call them algorithmic rents generally, but more specifically, we dug in on what we called algorithmic attention rents. There are other classes of algorithmic rents. You can there, for example, with Google, there are a lot of rents that are being extracted in their advertising ecosystem through their control of over all parts of the advertising pipeline. We didn't go into the detail on that. We were really much more focused on this set of interactions between the user and the ecosystem of suppliers and the self-serving distortions of the good that these companies are capable of delivering. As one other point that Mariana has always, when we talk about this, she always reminds me to bring up, and that is, there's a lot of narrative that says, like the surveillance capitalism narrative that sort of says that this sort of approach to big tech of algorithmic matching was doomed from the beginning. It was evil from the beginning. And I don't buy that. I think it was a real advance and a real public good. And there is an imperative that makes it go bad. And it is that shareholder value imperative. Because part of the dynamic, and this is the point of my Rising Tide Rents and Robber Baron Rents paper, is there's a virtuous period of market expansion when you get users by doing really good work. And then once you've asserted your dominance and the market has stabilized, you don't get the easy growth, but the market says you must keep growing your profits anyway. So at that point, you shift from these Schumpeterian rents, which are the rents from innovation, which are virtuous in some sense. They make us all richer, even though they are captured largely by the party that is creating them. But when they would be competed away, the company instead turns to other kinds of rents to keep their high level of profit. And that's what we saw happen as the internet growth stalled. It happened earlier with the personal computer. We won't go into that. Growth stalls, but you have to keep the profits growing, so you become extractive. And that's a choice that companies make. And I think understanding that it's a choice, I think, is central to this discussion. At any rate, so over to Ilan to talk about some of the mechanisms that we dug in on about how this is actually done.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks, Mariana, too. There are actually two things. The one is, how are algorithmic rents actually operationalized by these platforms? And what theory did we think we needed to ground our arguments in? And then secondly, why did we choose to kind of focus by way of application on Amazon? And we wrote 2 companion papers dealing with the application of this to Amazon's marketplace, whereby Amazon, instead of showing users the best search results, the best baseball from millions of different baseballs, and now shows you on the first screen mostly advertising results. So based on who paid the most to appear at the top of the search results. And so we also decided to focus on Amazon's algorithmic rents, and we wrote 2 companion papers which are being published. One in the UC Law Journal on technology. But firstly, on algorithmic attention rents, the idea being that these platforms have power because they own algorithms, and algorithms are allocating users' attention to results which might not benefit the user, but they're benefiting the platform. So we presented this idea that platforms have power because they own algorithms, and then instead of showing users the best search results, Google or Amazon are going to show inferior results, and these inferior results are going to benefit the platform. For example, advertising, those results are more directly profitable to Google if you click on them. And we presented these results about, I can't remember, 18 months ago to various academics, to experts, and they were entirely unconvinced by them. And I went away and I was a bit disillusioned. And I thought, wow, we must be totally on the wrong track here. Clearly, it's a waste of time to look at algorithms. But then I looked at the media, especially covering what was going on in antitrust, also known as industrial, organizational, competition law in Europe, in America, And increasingly, all the cases were about algorithms. Amazon is preferencing sellers who use its shipping services, or how hotels are colluding through algorithms, or Amazon is exploiting its ecosystem of suppliers, its merchants, by forcing them to pay increasing advertising fees. So why were academics so against the idea of looking at algorithms? And why were economists so against the idea? And I realized it comes back to the idea that economists and competition scholars assume that markets are basically perfect unless someone is fixing some kind of price somewhere, and then they're a monopolist, and the monopolist is exploiting consumers through higher prices. But this totally ignores the fact that many of these markets, there aren't often prices. And the way consumers are being exploited is by being shown inferior information. So the research results, the recommended results aren't as good. But they all assume that consumers will not just click on the first results shown to them. They're going to click to results page number 79. They're going to scour the internet for hours looking for the best baseball to buy, looking for the best deal, because consumers are unconstrained by time, unconstrained by limits in their cognition. They can spend all day on the internet looking for the best product to buy, because economists assume that homo economists, the consumer, is all-knowing, all-rational. And that is why leading antitrust scholars say that there is more competition online, not less, compared to ordinary everyday markets, because online there is more information. Online, there are more websites to choose between. So actually, we should be devoting our resources when exploring rents and monopoly, not to online markets. So we realized we actually had to reconstruct a theory which didn't rely on assumptions of perfect information, perfect consumer rationality. And Tim came up, sent this great quote to me from Herbert Simon, basically saying that when information is basically abundant, then attention becomes really scarce. And any technologies which help allocate our scarce attention are going to become incredibly valuable. And researching Herbert Simon and drawing on the tradition of institutional economics, we reconstructed fully this theory of algorithmic attention rents, which basically says that it's not just markets which make allocations based on prices, but it's all kinds of institutions which help markets do their job. And online, what is the main institution which has arisen to make market-like allocations? And these allocations are increasingly based on user attention. It's algorithms, because algorithms are allocating resources. Algorithms are making sales by allocating our attention to certain goods, to certain websites. And it's algorithms which basically, through the allocation of resources, are also allocating power and profits and driving the production process. So by kind of breaking with that neoclassical tradition, we were able to see why algorithms are so powerful online, because users rely on them to make decisions because they're not perfect. And that is why we have to interrogate the algorithms. And just to kind of wrap up by focusing on Amazon, that is why we say in our 2 companion papers on Amazon that if you want to interrogate the best market allocation, economists will say, well, look at the price. Is it competitive? And then we'll know. Because prices, when they're competitive, user preferences are satisfied. But online, when you look at Amazon search results, there's a million indicators. There's not just price. So we said you actually have to look at the algorithmic allocation as a whole, the order of the search results. And the algorithmic allocation will tell you how fair or how unfair, anti-competitive, and rent extractive the market is. So if you want to take the competitive temperature of a market, whether it's Google search, whether it's recommendation videos on Instagram, or whether it's the search results on Amazon, look to the algorithmic allocations, look to the algorithmic search results which come up. And the more that those search results are flooded with self-serving results, whether that's addictive content, which keeps you on the platform for longer, even if it doesn't fully satisfy the user preferences, or if it's advertising results, which benefits the platform, because in the case of Amazon, those advertising results is just another fee which sellers have to pay in order to gain user attention. So we said, if you want to take the competitive temperature, look at the search results. And then the last thing, and I'll conclude with this, is that the final ingredient, why these online markets are so unique and why advertising online is so unique, is not just that it's instantly clickable, but it's that it's an instantly clickable substitute, because consumers are making decisions through a screen. And that means that more of one search result means less of another, because we hardly ever click to the next screen. So that if you see 10 search results on Amazon, the first 5 search results really matter, and they're going to crowd out competing search results, which they are in place of. So because of the limited aperture of the screen, and especially on mobile, as Tim emphasizes, more of one kind of content means less of another. And that is why advertising is so pernicious online, because it crowds out the best results. And in the presence of continuous clicks from users at the top of the screen, it is used as this kind of rent extraction device. And yeah, I've just urged the audience to kind of read this paper further as a fantastic outline of our theory, and then also consider not just that important paper which Mariana mentioned on mapping rents, but also the companion papers on Amazon, which try and apply this theory to Amazon's marketplace, look at the evidence of how it is a rent extraction device, and why advertising in particular is this algorithmic rent extraction device. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Now, John, I would like to give it over to you to reflect and also go through your
Yeah, that's really great introduction to the background, why everyone should read this work and the companion papers. I'm delighted with this drawing attention to attention rent. And we're all concentrating on this and not looking at the sidebar ads that Cambridge University Press has been pushing out behind us and the virtual screens. So actually, there's an interesting phrase I'm sure Tim's familiar with, that we spend a lot of time optimizing how quickly we can get things in front of you. There's actually a phrase that we redesigned all the internet protocol stack for happy eyeballs. This is literally to deliver the maximum amount of advertising real estate on the screen in the shortest amount of time. And the entire Google stack was re-optimized over a new protocol called Quick to replace TCP/IP and the internet just for that reason. And it, to increase their click-through revenue. So I buy this story, and the cleverness that went into fixing things like that is really alarming. So I could ask a couple of questions. I think I'm going to roll them together because they're kind of related. But there have been proposals for fixing market problems, and one of the areas people have said is, well, could we not just move an awful lot of these platforms into subscription rather than advertising? And certainly when you look at the pernicious nature of content in traditional media like print newspapers in the 19th century, and then radio, and then TV in the 1950s, the commercial sector were driven into dominating the content with advertising and disappearing the good content. But there are corrections that have been proposed. So I'm going to mention one, which is a bit older, it's not that old, which is Thomas Piketty suggested taxing capital for people that were just extractors of rent. And the Piketty tax doesn't have to be very large to shift the equations towards thinking about different market models. And I wonder what you think about, could we think about taxing the owners of your attention, the platforms that hold a large fraction of the screen that everyone's looking at, or indeed in the AI case, the AI companies that have extracted value from someone else's content. The whole of the common crawl in the internet, for example, is the main training platform for at least 50% of what goes into OpenAI's platform, for example, and that's just going to go into the same space pretty soon. You could easily imagine raising a Piketty tax on either of those things, but in a regulatory framework might be very difficult. So if you've got any thoughts on that, you are some of the world-leading experts and thinkers in that area. The second thing I mentioned is I think Mariano kind of hinted at this. In Europe, we now have the Digital Markets Act, which requires interoperation of platforms, in particular the larger platforms interoperating the smaller end. Is that going to help at all in this particular part of the space? So the two kind of questions: is there a kind of tax lever that could help, and is there a regulatory lever that could help shift away from this pattern that we seem to have fallen into yet again? So that's my question, and any and all of you, please have a go at responding to that, or dismissing it if you don't think it's a good question.
Let me start by saying that while I think about regulators, my primary audience has always been the CEOs and top management of the tech companies themselves. You know, if I went back when I was doing my advocacy for open source software, for example, even before Web 2.0, I was saying, hey, this is an approach to technology that's really useful. You should learn from it. Yeah, when I was talking about Web 2.0, I was saying, here's an approach to how you use technology to build a better future. You should learn from it. And that's really what we're trying to do here with at the first bottom level of algorithmic rents. If you're self-interested and you actually understand that you are going down a path that other companies have gone before, IBM went from being a value creator in computing to being extractive. They got, and part of it was maybe the government turned on them. Microsoft went down the path of being a value creator to being extractive. Government turned on them, markets turned on them, you know, and you got innovators were driven out and go to create new competition precisely because you were not doing the right thing. And now it's happening again. You know, so there is a self-interest to companies in actually not taking too much of the value. I remember Walt Mossberg, the famous tech journalist, told me of a conversation he had with Steve Ballmer when he was CEO of Microsoft. And he said, if you would just dial back the greed, only 5%, it would make a huge difference. And it's true, you know, like there's simple things that Amazon could do to have an ad business, but also, you know, say, okay, we're going to give the top slot to the top organic result, which is actually the one that we think is best, rather than making people scroll down to find it. You know, sometimes it's a couple of scrolls down before you can find the thing that they will even tell you, this is our top choice. You know, and so, you know, with Google, I talked to them about, hey, you know, when you put you know, like if you do a search for something that you could buy locally, and you basically give over all the screen space to national or online advertisers, and people have to scroll down to find the local merchants, do you not think that that has a market shaping impact? And, you know, what should your responsibility be? So that's part of the answer, is just to actually understand that they're opening themselves up to competition by no longer giving the best results. And you see this, you know, in some sense with Google not going forward. It's classic innovator's dilemma. They didn't want to threaten their revenues, so they didn't do the bold thing that came from the outside with ChatGPT. If you, Mariana, or you want to talk about ideas on regulation,
yeah,
maybe.
I mean, just without speaking too much about it, I think one big issue, and this is actually what Schumpeter, I think, would have really wanted, and then somehow we got confused with Schumpeter and just talked about creative destruction, forgetting his biggest contribution beyond Marx, because Marx already said everything that Schumpeter said on innovation. Schumpeter's contribution was on competition. And his point was, we have a theory of competition that needs to talk about imperfect competition to even introduce innovation, which makes no sense in a mode of production where innovation is how firms compete. So just the fact that there's no benchmark theory of perfect competition that takes into account a lot of the features of ways that modern companies compete is the problem. And from the point of view of, I think, regulation and policy, it kind of requires there to be less of a division between, here you can see who I usually talk to, the ministers of innovation and the ministers of competition. So in Europe, for example, there's a complete mismatch and lack of communication, lost in translation between, you know, Vestager's unit, or she used to be head of it. Is she still head of it? Can't remember. Has she been, can't remember. Is it still Margaret Vestager? Anyway, head of competition and digital versus what's happening in the Ministry of Innovation. And that kind of comes back to my point about it's really hard to regulate something well, strategically, intelligently, if you don't understand it. And so it does come back also not only to the issue of skills, which I think is a huge issue today, because it is the first time, I think, in history. You know, I wrote The Entrepreneurial State 10 years ago about how so much of the innovation that we attribute to the tech sector actually came from, at least partly, government investments. But today, actually, that's almost no longer true. almost all the knowledge, all the tech is actually happening within kind of 5 or 6 companies. And that's not unlinked to the rents that are being used then to pay these massive salaries to university researchers who are leaving universities and going to these kind of 5 or 6 companies. But just as a broad statement, without going into maybe the details of tax, I think a general thing is we need much less of a division between the policies that are coming out of ministries of innovation and those coming out of ministries of competition and regulation. Because you can't really, I mean, even regulation seen as like too big, you know, then potentially if you just divide up the big, you just get a lot of little rent-seeking animals, as opposed to going to the core of how those rents are being produced through innovation, through understanding of the algorithms and the ways that we've been talking about. I don't know, Ilan, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I'll just add 1 or 2 things. Thanks. I used to think that subscriptions were part of the solution, moving away from advertising business models, but I'm less certain, because if a company has dominance, they have dominance because of strong network effects, meaning I get more benefits from this platform the more other people use that platform. Then once the company has dominance from network effects, that dominant company can take advantage of it in many ways, and increasingly they take advantage of it through using subscriptions and advertising. And they do so in such a way where they constantly are changing the price which the user is charged. Often that's a free product like storage, and then you're locked in, and then now you have a monthly fee. Then what's to say that on top of that monthly fee, they charge you advertising? I have a subscription to the Financial Times. Now there's more advertising on the Financial Times and Bloomberg, and they can keep on ratcheting that up. So there are other effects which are partly due to dominance sometimes, because there's network effects. With those network effects, they can do what they want, even if it is a subscription model. And partly it's because there's some lock-in, like I have a subscription now, and from a subscription I've locked in, and that opens up other opportunities for exploitation, even if it is not a dominant firm, because there's a subscription. So I think it is more complex. And I think the key thing there is to keep in mind that with network effects, you need a bunch of regulations, because past that tipping point, the firm can kind of do what they want. And I think interoperability is an important regulatory lever. But the point is that interoperability, let's say I could move my reviews from Amazon to another platform, okay? And then like that can make entry in the market more, at least slightly more easy for a potential competitor to Amazon. That interoperability can help, but it's slow. And Amazon has 10 years and probably $40 billion of fixed capital investments in delivery networks. So interoperability matters, but along the way, you need to say, if this platform is dominant, then regulate it as this dominant platform. Now, competition experts like Herbert Hovenkamp say, no, don't regulate Amazon because it's not always dominant. Maybe when it sells this dress, it's dominant because it accounts for 60% of the market share in the US. But when it sells cell phones, you know, when it sells like listening, in-ear Bluetooth listening, it's not dominant. So it can only be regulated on a product by product basis. But one of the implications of our framework is saying, you know what, Amazon's dominance, it doesn't just stem from its market share, right, in these products. You know, even when Amazon isn't producing clothing, even Amazon is not selling the AirPods, its dominance is because so much discovery takes place on Amazon. Even when I'm in a physical shop, I will use Amazon for discovery to compare products. And I might not even make that search, that purchase on Amazon. So it is true that Amazon itself doesn't account for the dominant portion of sales for every product happening in America. But we're kind of saying that this algorithm governs visibility in kind of a cross-cutting way throughout the economy. And part of our approach to dominance is to say that Amazon isn't just a delivery platform. It's not just a marketplace, but it's also a marketplace for information and discovery. And that dominance and that approach to dominance needs to inform regulation.
You know, I think one of the things that we're trying to say and trying to inform regulators is with a sense of how to think about the problem. Because if you think about it through the lens of prices, you don't have very many levers. If you think about it through the lens of information allocation and attention allocation, you notice some things. You notice, for example, that companies have an idea which is fundamental to their business, of what is the best match. And you can see when they diverge from it. You know, we know that Google's best match is its top organic result. We know that Amazon's best match is its top organic result. How hard is it to find that result? How much has it been pushed down? And this is part of why we've ended up going sort of a big part of our thinking. There's yet another paper which we didn't link to about disclosures. It's not that disclosures are a magic wand, but if you can start to build a language that gets people thinking about, oh, the companies are disclosing what they're optimizing for. You know, you think about you know, just financial disclosures. You kind of go, okay, we know how much profit they're making. We know how much capital they're investing. You know, there's a well-developed set of metrics that the market uses to pay attention to these things, you know, and there's analysts and all the rest. But there aren't analysts who are looking. I mean, there are actually, I take it back. There are analysts who look at this, but they're not central to the thinking of regulators or of people who are looking to value the stocks. You know, like if you talk to the marketplace pulse folks who look at Amazon or you know, folks who do Google SEO analysis, they can tell you how the results are getting worse, but it's not central to the discussion of how these companies are evaluated. You know, and we're hoping to raise it so that some hedge funds start saying, oh, we're going to bet against Google because we actually now know that they're giving worse results. And we think that there's going to be an impact. There's going to be an impact on Amazon competitively because they're no longer giving the best results.
And you know, also on that, it's interesting that even though now there's this whole backlash against ESG because of, I don't know, Texas being weird, but we know that there's a lot of greenwashing around ESG, but the G of ESG and the S in some ways was almost more weak than the E on the environmental. And there is an opportunity, again, coming back to my point initially about stakeholder value done for real, which is how you create value, not just creating value badly and then saying, oh, we need to give back to the communities, workers, or consumers, but actually creating it in a so-called good way from the start, in a pre-distributive way, that these kinds of metrics that we look at in the paper, especially actually around the disclosure paper, could help transparency and accountability to hold companies that want to call themselves purpose-oriented or doing the whole stakeholder value thing to be held accountable in terms of how they actually disclose the data around these issues under the G.
Cool. Okay. Back to Zainab and any more questions. We also have quite a number of questions in Slido from the audience.
Yes, absolutely. I've got one question. Well, I'll just ask one question of mine, and then there are several questions, yes, coming through. We need to move on to those ones. I just wanted to ask about, well, it's theory of competition. It's a start of a theory of competition, and it's a great one. But I'm interested in understanding whether we are looking for a pure economic theory, or are we looking for a more socio-technical theory that might also include at some stage more of the algorithmic behavior analysis in the process? Especially, I mean, the platforms that you're talking in your paper, like Amazon, Google, and the current attention market is more in a way understandable. But when things like LLMs come into play, when we have these foundational models coming into play and affecting more of the decisions, how transferable is this sort of theory or findings into that sort of context as well? I don't know if that's clear enough.
Can I jump in really quickly? I think it's really interesting to frame this. These are questions of political economy, not just economics per se. And political economy is a lot about who has power and what's the nature of that power. And, you know, in AI, you still have these, it's pretty clear. What are the sources of power? You know, that's what we need to be interrogating. And then what are the sources of economic value creation? How do these things intersect? My friend Bill Janeway likes to talk about a kind of like a three-sided market of government, the private sector and financial capital. And in some ways, these things all intersect, but they are all intersecting, and it's a big taffy pull to see what the shape of the resulting market is going to be.
Carlota Perez wrote a whole book on that, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
She taught Bill Janeway.
Oh, I know. Oh, this is true. Bill helped fund her work, but but it was deeply influenced by it. Yes.
And I think, our work is directly relevant in a very crude way. We're saying there's a direct correlation between the level of information in the market, how good the information is, and the level of competition. When the level of competition is, pardon my French, shitty, the level of information will be shitty. Airbnb for a while didn't even tell you the total price when you were booking. It only told you at the end, right? It didn't include all the cleaning fees and da-da-da. If you have a dominant producer of chocolates, maybe they won't tell you the ingredients in the chocolate bar. So, but these are mature technological markets. Once LLM markets mature and you have dominance, then you'll see a closer correlation between how good the answers are and how much competition there is. So that would be my kind of short answer.
I would add one thing to the power discussion. I think it's also about narratives. I mean, not so much around LLM, but around the kind of big tech companies, even, just how they came to power, basically, Google, Amazon, and so on. I mean, in many ways, that tech was not actually funded by them initially, right? So that's also where this notion of the ecosystem comes in, how these different types of value creating organizations, public, private, you might even today bring in some philanthropic organizations that are increasingly investing in some of these areas, how they kind of work together. And in some ways, by calling tech big tech, we forgot that actually in some cases they were just big media companies, and so they should be regulated as media companies, not necessarily as tech companies. So there is a bit about what are we even talking about, what companies and in what market are we looking at. I mean, definitely Facebook, I would argue, is kind of more of a media company and should be regulated as such, like the BBC.
Great, thanks so much. We promised 10 minutes for Q&A, but John, did you have anything like urgent to ask? Because there are also questions coming up. I will just, for the for timekeeping, I'll ask the 3 questions that are most popular currently, and you can choose to answer whichever you like. And then if we have time, we will go through more. So the first question is, the paper advises for the need for algorithmic transparency. Who should evaluate the quality of these algorithms, the government, companies, or third party? The second question is, can markets even function at all when the startup cost to compete with companies like Amazon is so high? The question 3 is, isn't it prioritize their profit compared to users? The expected behavior from companies whose goal is making money, shouldn't we change the market rules? So 3 questions, whichever you prefer to address.
I'm happy to jump in first, but if anybody else wants to go first, I'm happy to wait.
You can.
All right. So the first one about the paper advises the need for algorithmic transparency. Who should evaluate the quality of the algorithms? The government, companies, the third party? And I think the answer is all 3. And if you look, for example, at an ancient technology, and it was a technology. I'm talking about double entry accounting, invented in the 12th or 13th century. And it was an incredible way. It enabled the whole mercantile era because suddenly companies could manage their money in a different way. And that became the lingua franca of every company. That is, the companies actually use that as a kind of internal self-regulatory mechanism. And then government canonized it and said, you have to make some of that public. And what that enabled was actually a third-party marketplace of a kind of regulators, so to speak. We think of the regulators in finance of being simply, the government regulatory bodies. But what about all the auditors, for example? Companies are required to do audits. Anyway, my friend Gillian Hadfield has kind of taken that idea forward. She wrote a paper with Jack Clark of Anthropic about how do we build regulatory markets for AI. And regulatory markets are a really interesting idea because, like, it might be, for example, actually, I could go deep on that one. I won't go too deep on it, but in some sense, it would enable companies with specialized knowledge about the subject to be the ones doing the audits. But that requires government to have some standards about, well, what do you audit?
Yeah.
So it's really kind of a three-player game. The companies have to do it, the government has to do it, and a third-party marketplace has to do it.
And I've just put in the chat here that, we need something like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And that only happened when we had finally the consensus, or I should say, in part of the world, given the Trump stuff. But anyway, that climate change was even a problem. So the first thing is to define what is the problem, the whole kind of good versus bad, rents versus profits. And then once we have some sort of consensus on what the bad stuff is, and that's what we're trying to contribute to, then that needs to translate into disclosure. So digital related financial disclosures. Not just climate related ones, but that particular task force came out in 2015 after kind of 50 years of climate activism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, can I just jump to another question? Markets function when the startup cost to compete with companies like Amazon is so high? I think the answer is absolutely. We're seeing it right now with this disruption from AI, where for the first time, potentially there's competition for Google, even though the startup cost is so high. Now, of course, the startup cost of building these large AI models is very high, but once they get built, maybe it's not so high. So and this is the thing that I think could be a critical axis in the discussion of the regulation of AI is how do we think about open source models? Because if open source models get to be as roughly as good as the big ones, then you have a very competitive marketplace, and that marketplace can deliver all kinds of new services. And it's classic Clay Christensen. The PC wasn't as good as the mainframe, but it got better faster. The web wasn't as good as PC applications, but it got better faster, and it made the market bigger. And I think AI is going to make the market much bigger. And the question really is, do we have premature centralization and rent extraction because so much capital has gone in already? Most of it coming from the big existing players, by the way. And that's the thing that's important. It's not even investors who are driving this. It's Google and Microsoft and Amazon who are making the giant investments in, and Meta who are making the giant investments in AI. So we don't know how all that's going to shake out, but it's pretty clear that true innovation can always shake up the market, no matter how big it is. And the one thing that government could potentially do if they're serious would be, for example, to say, sorry, as Tim Wu calls it, no wimpy remedies. He calls the AT&T settlement in 1956. AT&T had to totally get out of any application market. They could provide telephony only, and they had to give away all of their 30,000 patents. He said Silicon Valley came from that. That was a badass government intervention. And you could imagine a badass government intervention that says, yeah, you can make a foundation model, but you can't offer any consumer-facing services. You're going to figure out what's the equivalent of your offering telephony. That would be one no wimpy remedies type solution there. But it could well be that just enabling more, not buying into the thing, open source is more dangerous than a big centralized closed model. I think would be a good start, and then we see whether that works.
Right. I mean, I'm very conscious we have 1.5 minutes left, but
sorry.
How about a government? No, it's a fantastic conversation. I mean, the government open systems procurement was what made the internet happen in the end, where US and Europe actually decided we're going to require all government procurement of networking will be open. and they switched from it being OSI to internet because it was pragmatic. So you could imagine that happening in other spaces, but the government, yeah, is one sector, but I agree, it could be a big one. I guess we have literally a wrap-up minute, but I guess, Ilan, did you have any more points to make up against those questions, or last remarks from
No,
everybody?
just to say, and then this is going to be my last remark. I mean, yeah, you can't compete with Amazon, and so the competition comes from what's called outside the market. So basically, you know, who competed with Facebook? It wasn't either Facebook, it was TikTok. And TikTok was video format, and it was not based on the social network. It was based on the algorithm, the pure algorithm, the recommendation. And so what that means is we got to wait for the next technological cycle. And that kind of sucks, because then in the interceding 5, 10, 15 years, depending on this dog type of life cycle, consumers get exploited, public health gets destroyed, information censorship goes wild, you know, all harms happen. That competition happens, just happens from outside of the market, which can take longer.
So with that, we really need to close. It's the end of our time. For everyone, if you have enjoyed this webinar, consider registering for Data for Policy conference that's coming at Imperial College in July. The highlight theme is going to be trustworthy decision making with AI. Also, Data and Policy Journal is our main publishing platform. We welcome contributions to our blog as well as formal submissions to the journal. You can check both conference and journal websites for more information, and also to subscribe with our newsletter. Many thanks again to first our speakers and everyone joining us on this session. Hope to see you again. Thank you very much. This is the end.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye then.